Hey everybody, welcome. Thank you for joining here, the online edition of The Gathering. My name is Nick, and we are glad that you are taking a couple moments to be here with us today. It is Super Bowl weekend, so hopefully you've got something planned for the big game this weekend. I don't know. Maybe you're not interested in the two teams. I guess I'm not really, but it's a good excuse to eat some junk food and watch some funny commercials, I guess. So hopefully you have some fun that way. We want to introduce you to this group a little bit here. If you are unfamiliar with us, a great place to get to know us is on the old internet. And apparently you found the internet because here you are. So if you want to check us out at our website, you can do that at everettgathering.com. You can read a little bit about us there. This thing is sort of a project, a conglomeration, a partnership between two churches. One that's very traditionally more traditional, formal, and liturgical, Zion Lutheran Church, and one that historically was really much less formal in Pathways Church. And these two churches found each other, a year and a half ago or so, and we started partnering together about a year ago to just do stuff together because we discovered that our core values are really similar. And yes, we had some different ways of doing things, and we had some different traditions, but we thought, it's kind of fun to come together and partner on something and learn traditions from other people. And so now in our in-person gatherings, we do some things that are sort of formal, we do some things that are informal, and it's been a really amazing opportunity to get to learn about the traditions of others. And I think many of us in the group have really appreciated what we've learned from one another. So that's in a nutshell a little bit about this project and what we're doing. You are always welcome to join us Sundays at 10 a.m. in person if you would like to do that and get to know the group more. Or you can check out those core values and the stuff that just kind of makes us on the website, and might give you a little bit of a glimpse about who we are a little bit better there as well. Now, what we usually do to kind of just explain ourselves and just describe ourselves, if you're unfamiliar with us, is using two words. We use the words cautious and curious. By cautious, what we mean by that is that many of us grew up in religious environments. Some of us grew up going to churches, synagogues, different things like that. We've seen religion in our country used in ways that's definitely helpful and positive and beneficial and inspiring, okay? There can be a really beautiful component to religion. And yet many of us have also seen religion used in some ways that's not so inspiring. It's been used in ways that's actually been hurtful to people that we know and care about, sometimes even ourselves. We've seen religion used in ways that is excluding of people and just goes toxic quickly. So we find ourselves a little bit cautious about organized religion. In fact, some in our group would go so far as to say skeptical of organized religion. And so I hear you're saying, well, this is a church, so how can you be cautious and skeptical of organized religion? Isn't that what you are? And yes, that is true. We are an organized group of religious people, but we think that there's sort of a good and healthy tension in maintaining a little bit of caution or skepticism of organized religion, even while being that exact thing, that it kind of helps us have a little self-awareness. And it doesn't guarantee anything, but it does at least give us a little self-awareness and help us identify where things we engage in might go off the tracks. Okay, so the other word we use to describe ourselves is curious. And by that, we mean we like to ask a lot of questions. And obviously, it's always okay to ask questions about things that you don't know. Many of us are good at doing that. But in our group, we like to spend a lot of our focus on asking questions about things that we thought we actually already had an answer to. Something we thought we were pretty solid on, because it turns out that's usually where our blind spots are hiding. There's ways of thinking, there's ways of believing that have been handed down to us over the years, and if we've never really examined those things, there's a good chance that we've got a blind spot hiding there. So we like to ask a lot of questions about things we thought we already had an answer to. And sometimes when we do that, we end up in the same place we started, but other times, we'll ask those questions and we'll discover, maybe there's another way of thinking about this thing, another way of believing that is faithful to Jesus as well, but makes more sense for our context or just is healthier overall. So those are the two words we use to describe ourselves, and if either of those seems to sort of resonate with you, then this might be a really good group to check out a little bit further. Now, what we're going to be doing here over the next few moments is sort of a miniaturized version of our in-person gathering. In our in-person gathering, we sing a lot of songs and a whole bunch of stuff. Here, we're just going to have one song. Billy, our worship leader, is going to come on the screen and lead us in a song here next, and you can sing along with that or hum along or pray or fast forward through it, whatever you would like to do. For many people, this is sort of an online worship experience for them, and so we like to include that part of it a little bit, at least here too. And then after that's over, there's going to be a little reflection video. This one has to do with immigrants, and it'll help us to think and direct our thoughts a little bit. And then I'm going to come on the screen after that, and we are going to look at part 2 of our little series we started last week about the Last and the Furious. We're looking at the most unpopular sermon of Jesus ever. And so we're going to take a look at part 2 of 3 here this week. And then after that, we're going to wrap the whole thing up with communion. Now, in our in-person gatherings, every week we take communion together. And we supply all the things you need for that, the bread and the cup. But in the online context here, if you'd like to participate, we'd love to carve out a moment for you, but you'll need to get together some items if you'd like to participate. So you'll need something for the bread, which could be a little chunk of bread or a little cracker or something. You don't really need much. And then for the cup, you'll need something there too. Maybe juice, if you've got some in the fridge, or maybe you have some wine left over from last night. You can pull either of those things out and have them on hand. And then we will create a space for you here where you can take communion if you'd like to do that today. Okay, we'll wrap the whole thing after that up with announcements and let you know what's going on from there. Okay, I think that's pretty much it. So I'm going to invite Billy to come on the screen. He's going to lead us in a song. And then after that, there's a little video, and then you'll see me on the screen here as we dig into this sermon of Jesus that really hacked people off. Okay? And this story that we'll be talking about today will give you a little clue into why people got so mad. Okay, let's go to Billy. He can take it away here, and I'll see you back on the screen in just a few moments.
God is able, He will never fail. He is Almighty God, greater than all we seek, greater than all we ask. He has done great things, lifted up, defeated the grave, raised to life. Our God is able. In His name we overcome. For the Lord our God is able. God is with us. God is on our side. He will make a way far above all we know, far above all we hope. He has done great things, lifted up, He defeated the grave, raised to life. Our God is able. In His name we overcome. For the Lord our God is able. Yeah.
Migratory God, who uprooted Abraham and led him into a foreign land, provide rest for your people, the stranger and alien, the refugee and wanderer, the one seeking sanctuary, settling in an unfamiliar place. Migratory God, who travels great distances to become human and live among us, dwelling in us. Help us to see that we are all restless, searching and seeking, finding that place of being and belonging, to lay our heads as you who had no place, except with your people. Migratory God, who has crossed borders and boundaries to be born a stranger, fleeing from country to country, feet moving for miles over desert and dry places, into the Jordan River, where you cross from one land to the other, in the waters of baptism, where you wash off ties to nation and citizen, so we might enter into a new kingdom and country. Migratory God, who accompanies us in our journey, remind us of where we've been, from where we've come, so we might not forget that we all traverse great distances to find the place that our hearts seek to settle. That place all of us call home.
All right, that's a great prayer there. Appreciate that. I just got home. It's actually a Saturday here today as I am recording this. And I just got home an hour and a half ago, I guess. I have been in Tennessee all week. I was at Emmanuel Christian Seminary at Milligan University there in Johnson City, Tennessee, and spent the week there. Been taking a few courses at Emmanuel online, and once a year need to go out and spend some time doing some in-person work. And so I was there this week, and it was great. I know it was snowing here in the Pacific Northwest, but in Tennessee, it was 70 degrees almost most days, and very pleasant, very different experience than you guys were having here. And it was just really good to be there with some of the professors there, to be on campus. I was actually born in Johnson City, Tennessee, when my dad was at that school working on his MDiv. And so it's just kind of was a special moment to be back there this week. Really good experience. Got to go hiking and do all sorts of stuff. But I'll tell you the part that you never like when you're traveling, I mean, wherever you're going generally, is the travel part of it. You know, I mean, the worst part about this trip was just the long flights. I mean, this place is all the way in the eastern tip of Tennessee, so you're flying all the way to the East Coast, and it's a long flight out there and back. And so today I'm tired because, you know, you get those hours back coming back here, but it makes for a really long day. And it's just cramped on the airline, you know, going all the way from, I went from South Carolina all the way back to Seattle today. Now, when I was in South Carolina this morning, though, it was early, and we were getting ready to board the flight, and it was a very full flight back to Seattle. And they were calling us. I was on American Airlines, and they were calling us by boarding party, right? They usually like give you a number, you know, boarding 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and even 9 through this airline. And so they call you according to the number to come up, and you get to load first if you're in boarding party number 1, and last if you're in boarding party number 9. So we're getting ready to do this thing. They call boarding party number 1. Those people go up. And then they call boarding party number 2, and those people go up. And right there, though, as this boarding party 2 was getting on the plane, there's a commotion that happens right there at the gate. And apparently, some guy who was boarding party number 8 had joined in with boarding party number 2. And it appeared that he wanted to do that because it was a very full flight and there might not be enough room for your carry-on luggage. It might have to get checked because it was full, and so it's most likely to happen if you're in the later boarding parties because the overhead bins have already been taken up. And so even though he was boarding party 8, he was trying to sneak on with boarding party 2 so that he would have a place for his bag. And the person there scanning your tickets, said, well, nope, you're not in this boarding party. You've got to wait. And he got really mad. And then the people around him started getting really mad because they started hearing what was going on and saying, how dare you try to cut the line because you got to wait here like everyone else. And it just kind of created this whole commotion right there in the airport. And I don't know, you ever see people, just get mad over things like that, and it's just really uncomfortable. But especially, people tend to get mad if you see someone who is trying to get something that they don't deserve, or they're trying to get off without paying for what they did. I mean, almost nothing will make you angrier than when you see some sort of injustice. Like, that is just not the way it's supposed to be. Well, one time, there were some people who heard Jesus just preach, and they got so mad about it that they wanted to throw him off a cliff. It wasn't injustice necessarily, but they just heard a sermon, and they were so mad they wanted to throw him off a cliff. Now, we're doing a little series here on that sermon. We're calling it The Last and the Furious. And we're looking at Jesus' sermon in Luke 14 or 16 through 30. It is the most unpopular sermon of Jesus, where Jesus preaches a sermon, and at the end of it, nobody raises their hand and says, I want to be baptized. Or nobody comes up to him and says, wow, Jesus, that was a great sermon. You just really killed it with that one. No, they all get mad about it, and so mad they want to throw him off a cliff, which is what we discover here in Luke 4, verse 28. All the people in the synagogue were furious when they heard this. That's his sermon. They got up, drove him out of the town, and took him to the brow of the hill on which the town was built, in order to throw him off the cliff. But he walked right through the crowd and went on his way. Now you wonder, what could Jesus have been preaching that could possibly make them so mad that they would want to throw him off a cliff? Well, we learned last week that in this sermon, Jesus is going to leave out one thing they wanted him to say, and he's not going to say it. And then there's two things that he actually did say that they really wish he hadn't said. And one of those two things he did say is the story that we're going to look at today, because Jesus in this sermon, he has two sermon illustrations. And last week we looked at one of them, the widow of Zarephath, and this week we're going to look at his other sermon illustration, which is the story of Naaman the Syrian. And this is a story that got them pretty hot. And he references it here in his sermon in verse 27. And there were many in Israel with leprosy in the time of Elisha the prophet, yet not one of them was cleansed, only Naaman the Syrian. Now, that's Jesus talking, and this is his version of a sermon illustration where he brings up a story that would have been well known to the people of his day in order to illustrate what he has just been saying. And it's the story, in this case, sermon illustration number 2, of Naaman the Syrian. Now, this is maybe the most hated story in the Old Testament and possibly most misunderstood. And it's found in 2 Kings chapter 5. And so today we're going to go back and we're going to read this story in 2 Kings chapter 5, because the people when Jesus were preaching, they knew this story, all right? But they had it right in their heads, and maybe you don't. So let's go back and let's kind of read this story and look at it. Now today, as we look at it, you'll notice that this story is pretty cool. It's got a lot of cool twists and turns and lessons. And I started studying it a while back, and I discovered that this story is really a story of contrasts. And it seemed like early on it was pretty obvious to tell that this story was particularly a story of contrast, of something that was big and something that was small. Now, most of the sermons on this story really highlight this particular part, but let me point it out to you. Now, we're going to read a little bit of this text, and we're going to meet two characters. We're going to meet Naaman, and we're going to meet this servant girl. And Naaman is going to be described as big, and she is going to be described as small. And on the screen here, you're going to see that I've highlighted those words so that you can see them. And in English, you're going to see that Naaman is described as great, and the girl, the servant, is going to be described as young, which is another word that can be translated as small. So look for that as we read this together here on the screen. Okay, 2 Kings chapter 5, verse 1. Now Naaman was the commander of the army of the king of Aram. He was a great man, that's our word big, in the sight of his master and highly regarded, because through him the Lord had given victory to Aram. He was a valiant soldier, but he had leprosy. Now bands of raiders from Aram had gone out and had taken captive a young girl from Israel. Okay, there's our word young. That can mean small. And she served Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, "If only my master would see the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy." Naaman went to his master and told him what the girl from Israel had said. "Well, by all means go," the king of Aram replied. "I will send a letter to the king of Israel." So Naaman left, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 sets of clothing. The letter that he took to the king of Israel read, "With this letter, I am sending my servant Naaman to you, so that you may cure him of his leprosy." Well, as soon as the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his robes and said, "Am I God? Can I kill and bring back to life? Why does this fellow send someone to me to be cured of his leprosy? See how he is trying to pick a quarrel with me." When Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his robes, he sent him this message: "Why have you torn your robes? Have the man come to me, and he will know that there is a prophet in Israel." So Naaman went with his horses and chariots and stopped at the door of Elisha's house. Elisha sent a messenger to him to say, "Go wash yourselves 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh will be restored, and you will be cleansed." But Naaman went away angry and said, "I thought he would surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, wave his hand over the spot, and cure me of my leprosy. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Couldn't I just have washed in them and be cleansed?" So he turned and went off in a rage. Now in our story here, this first part, it ends with a person who is angry, just as the people listening to Jesus were angry. And yet what we are going to discover here is that Naaman is angry for a particular reason. It's not the same reason the people are angry with Jesus, but it's pretty obvious here why Naaman is mad. He's angry because he sees himself as, well, kind of a big deal, right? I mean, Naaman is someone who is important. And we're going to notice here there's a contrast between big and small, and it's sort of a play on words, big and small, not just in terms of size, but also in terms of importance. And Naaman sees himself as big. He is important. He is a valiant soldier. I mean, he is a valued servant of the king, and he's got a lot of money. He's powerful. In fact, as you saw on the screen previously, the text describes him as a great man. And the Hebrew there for great is actually the word gadol, and it just means big, massive, important, okay? Naaman is gadol. Now, the slave girl who suggests to him that there might be a way for him to be cured of leprosy, she is not gadol, okay? She is not important. She is not wealthy. She's a captive. She was an Israelite, and Naaman's forces have raided into Israel, probably killed her family and taken her back with them as a slave. And so this slave girl, the text says that she is young, but the word in Hebrew is ketana, which means really small or little. And again, it's a play on words. She's small or little, which makes her young. But in terms of stature and importance, she is small, where Naaman is gadol, big. And it's not just that she has little importance, but also that she has a very little idea to go see this prophet named Elisha. Now, it's funny in the story that Naaman doesn't actually go to Elisha straight off. Notice where Naaman first goes. He first goes to the king of Israel, because Naaman is a big deal. And so he thinks, if I'm going to be healed, I need to go see someone else who is also important. And so it must be the king that I should go see, because he's important. He is great. He is big. But he gets there, and the king can't help him. He has to find Elisha. And Elisha is not a king, and he does not live near the king. He is small. Just as the girl, he is much less important. And Elisha tells him how to be cured, but the method for healing is also small. It just doesn't seem significant enough for Naaman. It doesn't seem gadol enough. I mean, he could wash at home, for crying out loud, and he thinks the rivers there at home might even be better. And so what we see here is there's a contrast. Naaman is big. The servant girl is small. Her idea is small. Elisha is small. The cure is small. And the problem here is that Naaman sees himself as above all of them. He's too big for these small ideas. And that is what makes him angry. Now his servants try to talk him off the ledge here, right? Verse 13, Naaman's servants went to him and said, "My father, if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? How much more then when he tells you, wash and be cleansed?" So he went down and dipped himself in the Jordan 7 times, as the man of God had told him. And his flesh was restored, and he became clean like that of a young boy. Now here our contrast is pointed out. The servants say, if you would have done the big thing, why not do the small thing? And Naaman does it, and his skin becomes young or little. There's our word again for small. And what we discover here is this is a humbling of Naaman. Now, that'd make a pretty good sermon, wouldn't it? I mean, that's a pretty good lesson to learn. Sometimes we think of ourselves as so big, so important, right? And it's good to remember that God uses little things. It's sort of humbling. And you could probably write a really good sermon using this text and this story to talk about the importance of humility and recognizing that God can use the little things. And that would make for a really good sermon, and you could preach that sermon, and probably no one would get angry about it. But that's not where the story ends. And it's not the only contrast in this story. There's another contrast, and that is a contrast between giving and receiving. Now, Naaman wants to be healed, but he figures that the way to do it is going to be to buy his way toward healing. And so notice that Naaman, as we read earlier, brings a very big gift with him. Verse 5 said, "So Naaman left, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 sets of clothing." And you think, okay, that sounds like that might be a lot, but how much is that? Well, in today's currency, that might be close to $1 billion. Okay, I mean, that is what Naaman is offering. I mean, he's a billionaire who is offering this money because he thinks he can buy some sort of healing. And he comes to the king and he offers it to him, and the king thinks that this is a trick. because the king knows he can't heal him. He thinks this is impossible. And so what he thinks is because the king of Syria has sent Naaman to him with all this money and this impossible request, that this must be some sort of trick where the king of Syria is asking him to do something that he knows he can't do in order to have a reason then to attack him and go to war. That's why the king is under such distress. And Elisha hears and is willing to help. But even after Naaman finally accepts his help, notice that Naaman wants to pay him for it. Verse 15, then Naaman and all his attendants went back to the man of God. He stood before him and said, now I know that there is no God in all the world except in Israel. So please accept a gift from your servant. Then the prophet answered, as surely as the Lord lives, whom I serve, I will not accept a thing. And even though Naaman urged, he refused. If you will not, said Naaman, please let me, your servant, be given as much earth as a pair of mules can carry, for your servant will never again make burnt offerings and sacrifices to any other god but the Lord. May the Lord forgive your servant for this one thing. When my master enters the temple of Rimmon to bow down, and when he is leaning on my arm and I have to bow down there also, when I bow down in the temple of Rimmon, may the Lord forgive your servant for this. And Elisha then blesses him by saying, go in peace. Now, Naaman has offered this great son to the king, but now Naaman wants to pay Elisha. But Elisha only wants to give and not receive. What Elisha has done is a grace. And he doesn't want to receive anything for it. He only wants to give. In fact, he even gives Naaman more to take home some dirt and gives him a blessing on his way. And there's a pretty good lesson here too, isn't there? I mean, you could probably write a nice sermon with this story, just talking about a contrast between giving and receiving. That you can't buy God's grace. The grace is just free. That there is a kindness of God that you can't merit, you can't earn it, and you can't buy it. It's just free. And you could probably preach a really good sermon about that contrast using this text. And it probably wouldn't make anybody mad either. But it's still not the end of the story. There's another part, and another character that we have not met yet, named Gehazi. And so, in verse 19, it continues on. After Naaman had traveled some distance, Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, the man of God, said to himself, my master was too easy on Naaman, this Aramean, by not accepting from him what he brought. As surely as the Lord lives, I will run after him and get something from him. So Gehazi hurried after Naaman. When Naaman saw him running toward him, he got down from the chariot to meet him. Is everything all right? He asked. Everything is all right, Gehazi answered. My master sent me to say, 2 young men from the company of the prophets have just come to me from the hill country of Ephraim. Please give them a talent of silver and 2 sets of clothing. By all means, take 2 talents, said Naaman. He urged Gehazi to accept them, and then tied up the 2 talents of silver in 2 bags with 2 sets of clothing. He gave them to 2 of his servants, and they carried them ahead of Gehazi. When Gehazi came to the hill, he took the things from the servants and put them away in the house. He sent the men away, and they left. When he went in and stood before his master, Elisha said to him, Where have you been, Gehazi? Your servant didn't go anywhere. Gehazi lied. But Elisha said to him, Was not my spirit with you when the man got down from his chariot to meet you? Is this the time to take money or to accept clothes or olive groves and vineyards or flocks and herds or male and female slaves? Naaman's leprosy will cling to you and to your descendants forever. And then Gehazi went from Elisha's presence, and his skin was leprous. It had become white as snow. See, the story actually ends with this little postlude of Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, who goes after Naaman after he's already been healed. And unlike Elisha, Gehazi wants to be paid. And you wonder why. Is it because he's greedy? Well, lots of preachers think so. There's been some sermons preached on this text that talk about this idea of greed. And maybe, but I don't think that's primarily why Gehazi goes after Naaman. I don't really think Gehazi is greedy. In fact, in verse 20, I think it tells us exactly what his problem is. In verse 20, right there in the middle, he says, "My master was too easy on Naaman, this Aramean, by not accepting from him what he brought." You see, Gehazi here is angry that Naaman gets what he doesn't deserve. He's hacked off that he gets off too easy. I mean, Naaman is a Syrian war general. He is an enemy of Israel, and he raids into Israel, and he kills people, and he takes back girls like that slave before as a captive. I mean, he's a terrorist. And in fact, we know he's wealthy. He's got $1 billion on him. But what Gehazi knows is that most of that wealth has probably been stolen from the people of Israel. And Gehazi thinks Naaman should pay. I mean, he's done all this harm to Israel. And now he just gets to be healed? For free? You see, Gehazi's upset because you can't just let Naaman off the hook. Someone has to make him pay. It makes him angry. And so he takes matters into his own hands. If Elisha won't, well, then he will exact a retribution. And I think it's at this point we should probably recognize that this story has played a bit of a trick on us. You see, we think the story is about Naaman and his discovery of humility. Or we think the story is about Elisha and his generosity, that he won't charge what God gives for free. And both of those are very good lessons, but I don't think that that's primarily what the story is about. It's a story of contrasts, but I think the main contrast in the story is the contrast between the two servants, the girl and Gehazi. That slave girl at the beginning of the story, and this slave, well, servant man at the end. You see, what I think this is an inclusio, which is an ancient literary trick or tool where you start and you finish a section with similar words or aspects of a story that show what is included in the main part of the story to kind of highlight your main emphasis. It's sort of like putting brackets around a section saying this all kind of goes together. And this whole section is really started and ended with the part of the story that refers to a servant. And there's a contrast happening between these two servants. The young girl shows compassion and care for her enemy. And Gehazi does not. And there really couldn't be a bigger contrast or comparison. I mean, this girl, she's a captive. She's a slave. Naaman is a raider into Israel. He may have killed her family and burned her town and destroyed everything she's ever known and taken her captive. I mean, she should hate Naaman. He's like ISIS. He's a terrorist. He has brought only terror and death to her family. And yet, when she hears of his disease, she responds by offering the only healing she knows of. She shows a kind of enemy love that we will later hear echoed in the words of Jesus. In Luke 6, But love your enemies, do good to them, and lend to them without expecting to get anything back. Then your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High, because he is kind to the ungrateful and wicked. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. Now, Gehazi, on the other hand, he's a servant too. He is also an Israelite, and he cares about his people. He's given up a lot to follow Elisha. And he may not necessarily be what we would think of as a bad guy. He's just angry when he sees an enemy not get what he deserves and actually instead gets a blessing from God. And that's what makes this whole story so unpopular, is because in this story, in 2 Kings chapter 5, it's like God is showing love to ISIS, to the terrorists. And it's not just a story of healing, it's a subversive story about God's love toward those we consider to be enemies. And it makes people mad because we think it shouldn't be that way. That God should make him pay. Somebody should make him pay. And that's why people didn't like this story. See, I get it. When it comes to enemies, we'd prefer the Gehazi excuse, wouldn't we? You're too easy on them, God. You can't let them get away with this. They'll win. We try to take retribution into our own hands. But the truth is, when we do that, like Gehazi, it makes us sick. And in the story, Gehazi gets the very disease that Naaman is cured of. But vengeance, retribution, and violence, well, it's like that. It's a disease, a cycle of sickness and death that we inherit and then pass on to the next generation. And so I think that maybe the big question of this story is, who's your enemy? I think that's the big question. You have some enemies? Political, religious, national, social. Who's your enemy? And I think the big question this story wants us to ask is, are you more like the girl or Gehazi? When it comes to how you think about and treat your enemies, are you more like the girl or Gehazi? I think that's what the text is wanting us to ask. And I think the text is pointing us to the fact that God himself is more like the girl. Now, when you tell a story like that, you'll make some people mad. And I know we live in a world today where we want justice and we want things put right. And it makes us mad to see injustice, and sometimes we want to see people pay. And the story reminds us that ultimately we have to leave that up to God and love the way that Jesus would have us love. Colossians 1 says it this way: once you were alienated from God and were enemies in your minds because of your evil behavior, but now he has reconciled you by Christ's physical body through death to present you holy in his sight, without blemish and free from accusation. It's a steep call to love our enemies, but I think it's what Jesus is calling us to do, to trust him that perhaps the way to bring about justice in this world isn't through violent retribution or exacting vengeance, but through love itself, that love may be what transforms the day. We're going to go to communion here today. We have a little video that's going to play, and as it plays, you can be reminded that the way that we created ourselves, the way that we had positioned ourselves rather with God is as enemies at times. That God never sees us as enemies, but at times, as Paul was saying there, we see ourselves as enemies, and that God is unwilling to treat us as enemies, only as children, and to love us. And as we were reminded of God's position and posture towards us, we are thankful for it, we are grateful for it, and also reminded that we should open our posture towards others in the same way. I'm going to pray for us. We're going to go to communion. You can pause the video anytime and like to take communion. If you can do that, that's great. And then afterwards, we'll come back here for some announcements and wrap up. Let me pray for us. God, we come to you today and we confess that it makes us angry when we see injustice around us, and we think that's good. I think that you care about justice, and that's why that is so imprinted on us to care about justice. I think we get that from you. But God, often we turn in our anger about injustice, we end up treating people around us as enemies. And we know that we want things to be put right, but God, forgive us for the times that we get overzealous and we begin to treat people as enemies when you have called us to treat them with love. Thank you that even though we've considered ourselves enemies of you, that you've never seen us that way, that you've always moved closer to us, that you've only and ever loved and accepted us and invited us into a new way of life. We pray as we think about the people who might be enemies in our life, that we'd always stand up for what is true and right and good, but that we would seek to change the world through the only way that has ever demonstrated an ability to do that, which is the way of the cross through love and self-sacrifice and generosity. We come to you today reminded of your act in that, and thankful for it, and then also inspired to live that way as well. It's in your name we pray. Amen. Okay, let's go to communion. All right, let's wrap up with a couple announcements here today. Some things that are going on. So I want to make you aware of some of those things. First of all, we do meet in person every Sunday at 10 a.m. We meet at the Zion Lutheran Church building, which is just south of downtown in Everett. It's just right next to Forest Park, and it's really easy on and off the freeway at the 41st Street exit there. You're always welcome to join us in person if you'd like to do that and experience kind of what that's like. It is different, obviously, than this online thing, and it's just some really cool people that you'd probably enjoy meeting, and so you're always welcome to join us there. You can also follow us on all the socials. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Threads. You can join us on there. Follow us at The Gathering Everett, and we post events that are going on and other information that you might want to follow, and that's a good way to check us out there. Student ministry today is on the screen, but it's actually not happening. It's Super Bowl Sunday, so students will not be meeting, and they'll be home watching the game and all that type of stuff, and so we'll get back to that next week. Coming up this next week, though, on Thursday, February 13th, we are going to be doing our Theology Pub. We meet at the Scuttlebutt Brewing Everett Tap Room. There are two Scuttlebutt tap rooms in Everett. One is a restaurant, one doesn't. One is down on the Everett Waterfront, and one is in downtown Everett. We're going to be at the one in downtown Everett on Cedar Street. You're welcome to join us at 6:30 p.m. We bring in some food, and all you got to do is buy your drinks. We have a great little table there and an opportunity just to sit around and discuss some theological issues or spirituality. Last time we talked about race, and I can't remember off the top of my head what we're talking about this month, but it's a fun discussion. There's no teaching element really involved. It's just a discussion, and it's a really good group of people, and anybody's invited to that. You don't even have to be over 21. Minors can come. It's a family-friendly establishment, and there are non-alcoholic drinks there too for both adults and minors. So you're just welcome to join us. And then the next week is the seniors meeting. Their gathering happens on Wednesday, the 19th at 11:30 a.m. They meet downstairs at the church building, and they usually do food, and they do some discussion together, and it's a really cool group. They usually invite me to stop by for a little bit, and I love hanging out with them. So we've never defined what senior means. I don't know what it means. If you consider yourself a senior, then come. If you're retired or whatever else, maybe I don't know. But if you consider yourself a senior, come and join that group, and there's a lot of cool people to get to meet. Then coming up at the end of the month, the Pacifica Chamber Orchestra meets exclusively at the Zion Lutheran Church building for their concerts. They do 4 a year. This is the Sunshine Concert. It's kind of their spring concert, and it is really incredible music. So if you would like to come to that, you are welcome to do that. Tickets at the door are $25 general admission and $20 for students and seniors. They're cash or check only, and you can purchase them at the door. But if you haven't come to that, it's an interesting thing to check out. And then finally, if you would like to give, you can do that online. You can do that at our website at everettgathering.com/donate. You can set up a one-time gift or a recurring gift, and you can do that on there. And we want to say thank you to those of you who have been donating so faithfully. Okay, I think that's pretty much it. My brain is tired. It's been a long day for me. You gain a couple hours back, but that makes for a long day. My brain is already very tired. So anyway, hopefully you have a good weekend. I hope the Super Bowl is a fun time for you. And next week, we're going to wrap up this little 3-part series. And we've looked at the 2 sermon illustrations. Now we're going to look at what Jesus says in his sermon. And we're going to kind of tie the whole thing together. So tune in next week for that. And we'll finish up the series. Okay, hope you have a really good week. Hopefully no more snow. I don't know. We'll see. Okay, see you next time. Bye.